Retro now.
Catherine Tabor here, voice of Padme Amidala from Star Wars The Clone Wars, wishing Jay and Dennis congratulations on 1,000 episodes of Podcast Stardust. And here's to 1,000 more. I have a good feeling about this.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are joined this week by a returning guest. You know him as Greg Cass, aka Eyeoncannon, co-host of the Long Take podcast, the Through the Glass Columns, and frequent contributor on Roll Base Card, and lately doing a lot of book discussions on Force Ghost Conversations with Anthony King. Greg, welcome back to Podcast Stardust. How you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing great. I mean, it's so funny how 10 years later, just a little dose of Force Awakens lifts the spirits and makes you feel so good. So I'm really excited to be here to share in this journey. I often can't pick what my favorite yearly project you all do is, but this might be it. That I really love hearing, everybody's story as they come on, and then breaking up the movie. It's really fun. So it's been great to be on the journey and great to be here in person this time.
Oh, well, we're so glad to have you back, Greg. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Greg was just alluding to, we are going to be doing our latest installment in our Force Awakens series here in just a second. But before we get into that, Jay, you want to break down our social media contacts?
Sure. It's super easy to find us. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
All right. There's the line: signals boosted to maximum output, shields down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So yeah, this has been fun. And Greg, I delayed reacting to what you just said so I could get all the preliminaries out of the way here. But I agree with you. I'm having a lot of fun with this because I think The Force Awakens was the start of an era where so many of us came together as a community. We started doing the podcasting. It was kind of like the height of Star Wars podcasting and the like. And so getting to go back and hear everyone's like common frame of reference, because you're a generation younger than Jay and I. And so at times we have guests that are from that same generation or earlier that weren't there when A New Hope was in theaters or when Empire Strikes Back was in theaters and like that. But we all have memories of what it was like and comparatively recent memories when this current era of Star Wars came about for The Force Awakens. So this has been a really, really fun experience to talk to people about this movie. So with that in mind, we're going to get into the questions that we have for our guests about The Force Awakens and everything that led up to it. So Jay, you want to go ahead and kick that off?
Yeah. So as Dennis was saying, Greg, this is really the first time that collectively we've all come together, regardless of the generation or era that we became fans. But it all happened because Disney took over Star Wars from Lucasfilm. So we always love to ask our guests, because this was the kickoff of the new era of Star Wars, where were you when you heard that Disney was going to be making new Star Wars movies and that there was going to be, a 7, 8, and 9, and this was all going to be happening? Do you remember that? And what was that all about for you?
I do remember that. So at this point in my life, I was married already, because this would be the fall of 2013, right? We're a couple years before Force Awakens. So, and my wife and I lived in a very small 1-bedroom apartment while I was still finishing up my graduate school work. I would graduate in the spring of 2014 with my PhD. And, I can't pretend I was a hardworking graduate student. I was taking a kind of standard for me at the time midday nap. So I, set my cell phone aside, and we had a little brown love seat, which I had to curl myself up, but it was like the best. And even in like early November, I would just kind of kick the window open a little, get a cool breeze in, and take a snooze for like an hour after doing some writing in the morning. And I woke because my phone was vibrating over and over again. And you do that thing when you're asleep and you're like, oh, something's up. It's not important. I'm going back to sleep. And then it just kept going and going and going. And I suddenly was like, oh no, like, where are my parents? Like, where are my grandparents? Is everybody all right? And then picked it up. And sure enough, everybody I knew was texting me because they knew I was the Star Wars guy in the family and the friend group, kind of all over. And they had all heard the news before me. And it only took, maybe I slept like an hour and a half, but everybody had already made it. It was circulating on social media and on the internet. And so everybody wanted to know my thoughts on it, or say congrats, or are you nervous, or whatever. And I remember my initial feeling was such jealousy. I was like, I take one nap and I'm behind with everybody in my life, but obviously got very excited soon after that. And then my long take review co-host Jen Sobchakchai, who Bankard, who's been on this program as well, her graduation gift to me was a trip to the 2015 celebration in Anaheim, and that was my first ever celebration. We were not in the main room for Chewie We're Home, but we were in one of the streaming panel rooms, and then they had the prop display. And I was head over heels from that moment. I was like, I am so excited. The teaser on Black Friday, the Force Friday, just hearing J.J. Abrams, who I was a huge fan of from Alias and Lost and so on. So I was 100% on the hype train as soon as I got up out of my nap.
So you're kind of like Han Solo. I'm out of it for a little bit and everybody gets delusions of grandeur, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
I love that. No, I absolutely love that. I love hearing everyone's reactions to when they heard that Disney was acquiring Lucasfilm. You kind of got into a little bit here, but one of the things that I reflect on fondly of that era is that once these movies were announced, we started getting hype again in a way that we hadn't had for years for Star Wars. And I know a lot of people engaged with it differently. Some people were following all the rumors. Some people were just engaged with the hype and the trailers and things that were coming out in magazines. But looking back on that time period and it may have been your celebration experience that you just mentioned, but was there a favorite bit of hype? Was there a favorite rumor? Was there a favorite, that experience that we were all collectively having together from that time period? That was something about that was your favorite?
So many fond memories, but I'll pick something slightly different, which is I do remember the Black Friday teaser, which was a real teaser with just 7 or 8 flashes of characters. First shot of BB-8, some Poe Dameron and the X-wings going across the lake. I remember in the mix. The crossguard lightsaber, and the kind of more specific reaction to that was Disney at the time got themselves in a little bit of a Baby Yoda Grogu situation where they wanted to identify who the characters were before the like fan names that people came up with stuck. And so I remember like a couple weeks after that, or maybe just a week, they did fake trading card images that took stills from the teaser trailer and said, BB-8 rolls into action and Poe Dameron takes the fight to the Empire, or probably the First Order, but little kind of captions. And I loved those so much. I actually recently lost a file, like we all do, and well, I guess like millennials and older do, because everybody else keeps things on the cloud. But I had to go into an old laptop, and I booted up this very old laptop I have. And the background was still one of those cards, kind of stretched and distorted to fit the size of the screen. But I didn't find the file, but I got such this rush of nostalgia when they were like just these tiniest scraps that were available out there. And I've never been a spoil yourself crazy on the internet. I think that leads to more disappointment often than excitement. But when they released official things, I was all in. So I loved having those. And I'm sure they eventually, I feel bad letting down Greg McLaughlin, my Rebel Base card co-host. I don't know if they ever made them into actual cards, or there were lots of Force Awakens cards, but it was a great way to kind of get the information and kind of tribute old fans in a way.
Oh my gosh. I think we all had some of those distorted screensaver images kind of thing. That is so great. That is so great. So all the hype, everything that was leading up to it to this point, tell us about your first viewing of The Force Awakens.
So my son Henry was born in June of 2015. So he's at baby at the end of June. He was due in July, but he surprised us a little early. And so I spent a lot of the fall of 2015 working, but kind of close to home and not really getting out. I remember, I believe there was a James Bond movie coming out that fall as well. And my wife and I, what we did to both see James Bond, to see, well, maybe he'll come up later, but to see Daniel Craig as James Bond, um, I went down and watched the movie, and then I left and got to the lobby, and she handed me Henry in the stroller, and then went into the next screening, and then we sat at home that night and compared thoughts over
Oh my
dinner.
goodness.
So I share all that because I believe Force Awakens was our first like actual date out of the house. I told my wife's name is Rachel. I told her mom, like, reserve this date. Like I need to go. And what I remember here in Boston is it was raining like torrentially, and the traffic was horrendous in response. And we made it perfectly fine well before the start time, but I was sweating it every moment of that ride, like, oh, it's getting closer, and so on. So um and I remember that morning I bumped into my boss because I was out of grad school and I was teaching at that time. And my boss was, knew I was a Star Wars guy. He's like, "How you doing, man?" And I was like, "I'm really good. Like, I'm really good." And he looked at me and he had this really prescient insight, and he just said, "It's never gonna be like this again." And I was like, "You're right. It really never will," because, whatever happens with Disney, we knew it was kind of going to be more present. And episode 7 was such a gift that we never thought was going to happen. And I don't know if younger fans really appreciate that, because Disney has made Star Wars such a wonderful constant in our lives. So I remember kind of sitting down at the theater with his voice ringing in my mind of like, it's never going to be like this again. And when especially, nothing beats the fanfare in the theater, nothing beats the logo zooming down. But when episode 7 crawled onto screen, I was crying. And, I'm masculine enough to admit it, that it just really hit me that I never thought I would be here. And it was a dream from when I was, 10 years old, right on through. And we were about to see what happens to Han Solo and Luke Skywalker, maybe, and Princess Leia, and I couldn't wait. So it was magic, and I loved it. We'll probably talk through some of my specific memories as we go on tonight, but I was 100% sold the whole time, and have never looked back. Even the later discourse of, oh, it's just A New Hope warmed over. I don't buy it. I love this
No.
movie. This is a great movie.
No, I agree with you completely. What I love about that story you just told us is that if you go 10 years earlier, when Revenge of the Sith was in theaters, I had not quite a 1-year-old. And it was one of the first date nights that my wife and I had to go see Revenge of the Sith at the time. And yeah, I can appreciate what you were saying, what you were feeling there. Now, we were able to go see it together because we had a babysitter that was able to come and take care of my son. But yeah, it was, yeah, I remember that feeling. It was fun. So anyway, let's move on. This is a movie that is chock full of great characters. We have old favorites returning, the aforementioned Han, Leia, Luke, Chewbacca, and the likes. We have plenty of new characters, and Rey, Poe, Finn. So with that said, who was your favorite character in this movie?
I would say I fell in love with BB-8 very early. Actually, that celebration I attended, I already had a bootleg BB-8 T-shirt, and I got stopped every 5 feet, like, which booth? Where'd you get that? Like, I'm like, sorry, it's from the internet, and it's not legitimate. Don't tell Lucasfilm. So I do have a lot of affection for BB-8 and the Sphero BB-8 and kind of that whole moment where he was so prominent. But when I think about Force Awakens, I think about Rey, and I really love the character of Rey. I like all the big three, but to me, Rey was such a breath of fresh air into the franchise. You know, I have a lot of love for the prequels, but maybe when Force Awakens came out, that was a lighter love. I was a little cynical back then, and I remember saying that first sequence where they introduce Rey, I said there's more characterization and acting in that, 3 minutes where they show her scrubbing the parts and looking at the old woman, and then they pan through her AT-AT home, and she's just sitting there watching the starship. I'm like, that's just beautiful, and it's so in the spirit of Star Wars and so wonderful. And especially when you get to the surprise that I think I maybe had seen the toy that told me she was going to get the lightsaber, but it's still a surprise at the end of the movie, and it really was exciting to me. And I loved her, and we're going to talk about one of the best Daisy Ridley scenes in the film tonight, and I think she has been enduring for me since, and I obviously have spouted many times here and elsewhere that I love Last Jedi, and that's where this kind of love of Rey develops into something really stronger. But I also got to say, Oscar Isaac shares my birthday, so I do really love Poe Dameron, but since my wife has started to call me the second handsomest man born on March 9th, I can't sign on to that.
So yeah, Greg, I loved BB-8 as well when he first rolled out on screen, and I also had the Sphero. So and
Nice.
I still have it, and it's sitting on my shelf right now. I haven't used it in forever though, so I need to do that. So I'm with you, but yeah, Rey's a great character. So our last question before we actually get into the segment is, what was your favorite scene from The Force Awakens?
I mean, I knew you were going to ask this, of course, and I sat thinking this afternoon, and it's a long list, but I'm going to pick one that, the end is incredible with the duel, and as I mentioned, and Avengers gets a lot of credit for Cap picking up the hammer, but I heard similar noises when, Rey got the lightsaber smacked into her hand. But I will actually say I really enjoy when they do the Falcon chase on Jakku. And I really like that that's kind of a moment where it kind of is the first time it starts to really feel like old school Star Wars. You're like, oh, like they do have it. They've got it. And we've done that. And why I love it so much is because it does feel very familiar. It's the Falcon, it's the turrets, it's the cockpit. But then what they're having the Falcon do, and the fact that the Falcon is in atmosphere and not in deep space where the mat work is easy, it just all felt really Star Warsy. And from that kind of the garbage will do moment until they finally rocket off through space is so great. And the banter between Finn and Rey, I think that's where they really figured out we've got really good chemistry between these actors, and they kind of leaned into it. And that move at the end where Rey flips the ship and the turret lines up. It's just okay, we're dealing with somebody really cool now. It's the best of Luke and Han Solo in some ways. So I'll take that one. The Battle of Jakku comics still haven't sated me. I need to know more about everything that happened there to leave all that wreckage. But it's fun to see the Falcon zip through it.
Oh, right. I know. I want to know more as well. And Dennis and I, we gush over this scene all the time. And I think, for me, I've been thinking about this a lot and why I feel like it's my favorite scene as well. And not just because of all of the awesome things that you just mentioned, but for me, it's all about passing the baton and the next generation that gets to keep Star Wars alive. And there was, for me, a point in 2007 at Celebration 4 in Los Angeles when I was there for the 30th anniversary. And this little boy was getting his picture taken by his dad. And I asked if I could take a picture of him as well. And he was just in front of one of those, like Tatooine sunset backdrop kind of things. And he had his little robe on and he had his little lightsaber. And I was like, and it made me tear up because my boys were 5 and 7 at the time. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is perfect. Star Wars is forever. Here's the proof right here. The baton is being passed. And so I think I finally landed on, I think that's why that scene is also my favorite. So I'm with you. There's just something magical about it in every sense of the word.
Yeah, you nailed it with Star Warsy. It was the ultimate Star Warsy scene. And I remember the first time exactly from the point you pointed out, when the garbage will do, and you see the Falcon in the background, and you get that da-da, theme, and right before they run out and take off, and it's just a pure adrenaline moment. So yeah, good choice. 2 thumbs up here. All right, let's get into this segment. So we are picking up at 1 hour, 22 minutes and 10 seconds. We're going to go to about 1 hour, 33 minutes and 41 seconds. So if you haven't watched it lately, go check it out and come back for the discussion. So this begins with Finn and Poe descending into the control room at the resistance base on Dakar in the Elenium system. And Poe introduces Finn to General Leia Organa, and she praises him for leaving the First Order and saving Poe's life. And Finn immediately pleads for help in rescuing Rey. And Han has apparently told Leia all about this, and she pledges that they will help. But first, she needs to know everything about Starkiller Base. So this is the second Leia scene in the movie after the reunion with Han. Greg, what did you think about this whole segment? Is a lot of setting up what's coming into the third act of the film here. But what did you think about this introduction between Finn and Leia, and what's going on here?
Well, it's my opportunity to get to say what a gift to have had Carrie come back for kind of 2.5. I don't know how to count Rise of Skywalker, but, seeing her again in these scenes when I watched them this afternoon, it was like, she's there and she's got the same warmth and the same personality. It's a little tacky to say, but I remember articles at the time that said something along the lines of like, thank God they let Princess Leia age naturally. And I remember like really feeling that Leia looks like a woman who's lived her life and carried burdens, and hasn't been, Hollywood Botoxed or what have you. So I really loved having Carrie back. And, these scenes, she sparks in the scene you already got to cover, which is, nice jacket and all that. But I really think it's good when she gets into general mode here and we get to see that side of the character and to know, seemingly we've filled in some of the gaps since, but seemingly that she's been doing this life. And then my other reaction to this first scene, I don't want to lose the chance to just say, Dakar is really cool. And the way as they descend those stairs initially and you see the roots built in, there's something very Yavin 4 about it that feels familiar, but it's very new. My thumb was not very skilled with the Apple TV, so I had the exterior shot of Finn and Poe a second before that, and then they walked down into the base. And the movie making part of my mind was like, well, those were exteriors out at that park outside London, and then this must have been like a real set where they were probably an entirely different day, in another location. But the base works really well, and I think the way Leia is empathetic towards Finn, but all business is really nicely done.
Jay, question for you on this one, and
Yeah.
Greg, you can chime in too. Leia goes out of her way to praise Finn for his bravery in leaving the First Order and saving Poe's life. But then, since that moment happened earlier in the film, to hear we've seen that Poe is really afraid. Not Poe, Finn is really afraid. And that wants nothing more than to get away from the First Order. And you could argue the only reason why he's here now is because Rey got taken by the First Order. So is this, I don't want to put any words in anyone's mouth. Is Leia seeing Finn's true character, or has Finn really tricked her, or something else?
Leia is so diplomatic. And I think, especially in the way that she talks to Finn, in the fact that she's not trying to lessen his worry about Rey, she is addressing that and saying, yes, we it's horrible, but we need to do this other thing right now. I think that Leia does sense that Finn was trapped. And because she's seen so much, I mean, let's face it, there's been so much that she's been through. There's so much that she's seen. She's very good with people that I just think that she's trying to maybe, I don't know, de-escalate is the proper word here, but get on Finn's side, if nothing else, to say, look, you're safe here. you're safe with the resistance. These are people that are out here to do good. We're out here to help you if you need it. Even though she doesn't say that, you can get that from the way that she's saying it. So I don't know that she necessarily was trying to manipulate him at all. I do think she was very sincere, but she also needed to get the information that she needed to get. So, and of course, the best way to do that is to make people feel at ease. So, I mean, that's my take on it, I guess.
Okay. Just to be clear, I was not suggesting she was manipulating him. I think
No.
my question simply is that, Finn has kind of come off as a coward
Right.
in the Takadana scenes with Maz Kanata, that he wanted to get as far away as possible. And yet she is treating him like a hero. And so I guess I should rephrase it. Is she seeing something in him that he is not seeing in himself at this point?
Yeah, possibly.
Right. But Greg, what is your take on that?
Yeah, as Jay was speaking, I was thinking back to the Maz Kanata line of I've seen these eyes in other people before, or I'm quoting poorly. Sorry, Madam Kanata. I'm not sure what title she goes by. Queen. She's Pirate Queen Kanata. But I do think that I think it's a little bit of how you just phrased it, Dennis, which is Leia is able to understand who this is in the context of all the people she's met in the course of the rebellion and in the course of her political career and in her personal life, and understands, I think the way she says, like Jay just said, calms him down and says, Han told me about the girl. She sounds like a really good project manager. It's like, okay, that's problem B. We got to deal with problem A, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to progress through the steps. But I do think she is not writing off those concerns. Like a good leader, just has to determine what the best first move is, or what the most important problem is, and as she figures out that order of operations. It's a really kind of interesting broader question, because I think Finn is really brave to have walked away from the First Order. But you're right that, we haven't necessarily gotten to see that bravery since. And in the course of this movie, though he is tempted away and then, says, so sorry, Quiggold and Crimson Corsair, or I forget and says, I'm going back and going to help. I'm not going off to what a spinoff that would be. The three of them off having adventures, but going to stay with Rey. So I think she knows he's got the potential, and it strikes me that she'll eventually be somebody who is pushing him to be a general. So, she saw the talent early.
Of the three of us, and I'm spending a lot more time on this first 30 or 40 seconds of this clip than I intended to, but I just listened to you have a conversation with Anthony King on Force Ghost Conversations about Bloodline. And this is the book where Leia went from being Galactic Senator to General Leia Organa of the Resistance here. Something that you said earlier in the conversation about her and letting her be herself, letting her have her age here. How do you, does that book inform your opinion at all at this stage of The Force Awakens and where we see Leia?
I mean, especially since I just read that within the last month for the first time since it came out, it definitely was on my mind. And in the conversation with Anthony, I referenced the later scene in this chunk where Leia says something akin to, we both went back to doing what we knew what to do, or the things we knew best. And I do think that spirit is really here, because so much of Bloodline, and I'll keep it spoiler light, so people should, if you haven't read Bloodline, it's one of the better canon books, really, especially about the kind of traditional characters. But she's ready to walk away from this life and just kind of be a little justifiably selfish and go be herself and have adventures on her own and spend time with her husband and rekindle. And it's like the grizzled movie detective who says, oh, they just keep pulling me back in, right? Like one more case and then I was going to retire, and finds a reason to start the Resistance, which we won't get into the specifics of, but it really informs me that, she, and it is there in Carrie's performance, which I'm sure is what Claudia Gray drew from when she wrote the book after seeing Force Awakens, I believe, which is that, Leia looks tired. She's still committed. She's still a great leader. I love, right back to the beginning, the general, and to me, she's royalty. Like she is both general and princess still. But it's been a long life. And the last thought I'll give is by the time we get to the end of the what is now called Legends, I remember being like, don't these people deserve a break? It's been like 40 years
Yeah.
since A New Hope, and they're still dealing with crisis after crisis. And I think the balance they found in Bloodline and here in Force Awakens for both Leia and Han, who feature so prominently in this chunk, is they're tired. They're wary, but they still have their duty and are ready to serve and do what's right.
Mhm.
All right.
Always fighting the good fight. I need to reread that book. I
Yeah.
have to put it on the list of things that on my bucket list of
Never
fandom
growing
things
book
to
pile.
redo.
Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
so
my
true.
one other plug is it hits a little different after the Kenobi series and kind of those additional pieces of Leia and
Oh,
Bail
yeah.
we get. So this was my first. It was only the second time I'd read it. I read it when it came out, and then I believe it turns 10 this month. So it's been a minute.
Yeah.
Wow, has it
Okay.
been out that long? That's crazy. Whew.
So on to something slightly more lighthearted here, and that is Chewbacca starts getting medical treatment from Dr. Kalonia there, and he seems to be telling the story of the escape on the Millennium Falcon and everything that happened up to this point. And Dr. Kalonia's got this great bedside manner, oh, that sounds very scary. And then Chewbacca was like, yeah, it was scary. You can kind of tell what he's saying there. Just,
Mhm.
you must be very brave. Apropos of nothing, if you go check out the bad lip reading take on this scene, it's kind of hilarious. So go look for that on YouTube here. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because we've got a lot more of this whole segment of the movie to go through. But does anyone have any observations about Chewbacca getting his medical treatment here before we move on?
I remember it got a big laugh in the theater. Like I think it's a little silly gag that works. And the doctor is actually in Bloodline as well. So that stood out when I got to this scene. I was like, oh yeah, she pops up in the book.
And isn't she in real life Christopher Lee's sister? I think I remember
Ooh.
seeing that somewhere. That's a nice little piece of trivia.
Yeah.
Count Dooku's
Yeah.
sister in real life. I'll have to look
I-
that one up.
Yeah, definitely, because I don't know, but that's cool if it's true.
I'll do it right now.
Okay. Well, while you're looking that up, we'll move on. 3PO retrieves the map from BB-8, and it is incomplete. It's only a small portion of the galactic map, and he goes on to say it doesn't match any course on record, and Leia becomes a bit discouraged about finding Luke. And then Han kind of comes in to comfort her, and she really says, don't do that. And he says, do what? And her response is anything, at which 3PO gives that indignant princesses there. So again, there's Greg, when I asked you to join us for this segment, I try and pick out something that is as close to 10 minutes as I can get, unless we're in the middle of a scene. Then I just kind of extend it out to where we're going. And so when I sent you this segment, it's like I didn't really pay attention to all the details. I just saw what ended as close to possible after 10 minutes. I was like, there's not a whole lot that goes on in this segment. And I was like, when I sat down to actually watch, I was like, whoa, there is a whole lot discussed in this segment here. But the map here, okay, as a professor in literature here, and as someone who got his degree, Bachelor of Arts in English literature, I wanted to ask you about this here because there's a lot of mythological pull for this to me. There's this map, there's this hope, it's incomplete, and not even getting into the Han leaning in and saying, Leia, and then she brushes him off and stuff like that. I don't know what my question is here, but what did this part, say to you? What part of this part of the movie say to you?
Well, I would say, first of all, the whole map thing, and then, I keep being nervous about spoiling the end of the movie, but I think everybody's seen it.
Go
But,
for it.
at the end when they fit the two pieces together, it's all a little silly and a little cheesy, but that's the kind of silly Star Wars cheesiness I'm totally here for, right? Like, whenever somebody sours on a franchise or a movie, they could nitpick every little detail and be like, that's really dumb. And I'd kind of be like, yeah, sure, but it's great, and it's a part of that. So what I like about the idea of the map is it does feel like something from our world, a piece of a treasure map, or there's a classic Simpsons where there's a piece of George Washington's portrait that Jebediah Springfield wrote his last testament on. And it just feels like that kind of device of fitting those pieces together, and the fit proves. There's this weird technological version that doesn't really work here. But it works for me in that, the idea being that Luke had just a path and he had this little piece of where he was and didn't want to make it easy to locate him. And we learn a lot more about that later in Last Jedi, why he might not want to have been found. And the other thing I was thinking about is, um, I don't think this made it into the movie, but if you read the novelization and some of the materials around it, there is an idea that R2 actually has the rest of the map because of what he downloaded on the Death Star in A New Hope. Like when he accessed the Death Star and the Imperial records to find Princess Leia's cell, he got a full map of the galaxy except for this little piece. I don't know. I think maybe the leap goes a little too far to make that totally make sense. So I found myself thinking about that and kind of landing in the place of, I'm actually kind of glad they left that out and just let this be kind of a little more mysterious. And it's a piece of a treasure map. And I took down some of my Indiana Jones decorations behind me to be Star Wars tonight, but it reminds me of Last Crusade with we had a map with into the desert with no names, and they knew they had to start in Alexandretta and then move forward. So it's just kind of classic serial silliness, and I'm here for it.
Mm-hmm.
I actually ended up watching 4 of the 5 Indiana Jones movies last weekend.
Nice.
So it's
Wow.
partly inspired by your all's conversation on Long Take. So you can tell I'm a fan of that podcast. But
That's fantastic.
yeah, I'm glad you brought up the whole, because I couldn't remember where that came from. I did remember that somewhere it was said that there was this thought that R2D2 had the rest of the map, and came from when he was on his time on the Death Star from A New Hope. But I didn't remember if that was from the novelization or where that came from. So I'm glad that you were able to supply that information for us there. And of course, I kind of feel like with that in mind, in a second here, when BB-8 comes and pulls the tarp off of R2D2 and starts beeping at him, that whole conversation with 3PO makes a lot more sense. But Jay, what did you think about this sequence with Han and Leia? It starts with them there in that room, and he says, he comes, Leia, and she says, "Don't do that." And he says, "Do what?" And her response is, "Anything." And then when they, kind of leave the room, he says, "I'm just trying to be helpful." And then her response is, "When did that ever help? And don't say the Death Star."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much history there, and I'll address that in just a second. To answer our last question or musing, if you will, the actress that played Dr. Kalonia was Dame Harriet Walter, and she was Christopher Lee's niece, not
okay.
sister. So I knew there was some
Nice.
connection there. So I'd
That's
heard
awesome.
that. So and somehow I'd retained that. So
Jay
getting back
dropping
to your
knowledge.
question.
Yeah, I didn't come here to learn, but now I did.
Well,
Thank
there you go. You're very welcome. Ta-da. But for Han and Leia, this whole movie, as you were bringing up earlier, Greg, there's so many Star Warsy nostalgia points in this movie. And I just think that the relationships between the OG characters is definitely one of those. So the banter between Han and Leia, and just the fact that we were so excited to see them both share the screen again, but yet so heartbroken at the fact that there's so many years in between here that we feel that there was so much that happened and was lost and had changed or was just simply missing, that it leaves the audience with this I know I felt very bittersweet about it. Like, oh, it's great to see them together again, but obviously things are not the greatest. So you felt for that. And I know I felt like, oh gosh, there's so much story to tell here. But yet the more things change, the more they stay the same, ultimately. So I kind of go back and forth between the two of those.
So go with me here for just a second. And I'm going to get into the next time we see these two talking. And that is when Han and Leia, they resume this conversation in the hall somewhere else away from this control center. And Han is kind of pouring his heart out, saying that, every time Leia looks at him, she's reminded of Ben. She says she wants to get him back. And then he's trying to find some sort of closure when he says that there's nothing more we could have done. There's too much Vader in him. And Leia responds, "Well, that's why I wanted Luke to train him." But, she regrets having sent him away. That's when she lost him. That's when they lost them both. And then Han, and this is the line you were referencing earlier, Greg, We both had to deal with this in our own way. We went back to doing the only things we were ever good at. For Han, it was being a smuggler. For Leia, it was being in charge of a rebellion, resistance type movement. And then Han goes on to say that they lost their son forever. No, it was Snoke. He seduced our son to the dark side, but we can still save him. And, she's trying to get through to him that, yeah, Luke may be a Jedi, but don't underestimate the power of Father. And we can get into that in a second. But when I said go with me here for a second, one of the things that happened back in 2015 when they started doing Marvel Star Wars comics again, and it was repeated over and over again, is that they kept going to that well of Han and Leia banter. And we can all see the scene in our minds from The Empire Strikes Back when they're in the hallway on Hoth and Han is mad that Leia hasn't made any type of plea to get him to stick around. And he's towering over her. And, he's leaning forward and he does the whole finger in her face and thumb back at himself. And she's just kind of like, defiantly standing up to him. That same image has been captured like a half dozen times at least in comics and been referenced in other books and everything else. And no doubt that banter between Han and Leia is like iconic. We all know it, the way that they were able to, the chemistry between Harrison Ford and Carrie Fisher is just undeniable. And it really, really worked. But I love this scene because it's such an evolution from that. It's not them just trading barbs. There's simmering frustration. As you were saying, Jay, there is the years of shared weariness that's underneath there. And then the absence that comes through in all this. I think this is a very underrated exchange between these two characters that, just thinking about the way that they were bantering in A New Hope, The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, only for us to see them get married after the fact and stuff like that. But then just the tenderness that seeps out here in these scenes, and then one that's not even in this segment of the movie. I think it was genius in the way that it was written and came out. Okay, now that I've given my little TED talk there on Han and Leia, any thoughts?
I thought that was excellently said, and I agree. And I want to actually combine what you both just said, synthesize it, because I really liked Jay's use of bittersweet. And I think sometimes when we hear bittersweet, we think that that's a negative emotion, but sweet is in it. And it's like bittersweet chocolate, like it's still good, right? Like there's both the pain and the joy of it. And I do feel like that's the emotion I feel when I see that banter rekindled in much the way you said. I debated with myself sitting in my living room today because some of this writing is incredibly well done, where they're kind of, they're catching us up, but it actually still sounds like two human beings really talking. And maybe that's the highest compliment I can give it, is this sounds like old married friends of mine who, you've had the fight so many times, you don't actually have to say the words anymore. You just know that the emotions that you share. And then there are, real George Lucas style clunkers in here, like, no, it was Snoke who seduced him to the dark side. I'm like,
Right.
if anybody can deliver that and have it sound halfway like a human being, God bless you, Carrie Fisher, for doing so. But I do think that it was a really nicely drawn relationship, and since I don't get to be on the next episode, I'll let you keep your powder dry and say, the way the two of them part is so lovely, and it matches the same spirit in this scene of we've lived through it all. I love the exchange of it wasn't all bad, and no, not all bad. Some of it was pretty good, and yeah, pretty good. And I think that spirit is across the whole scene here, where they've lost a child, not in the way we often use that phrase, but they've had a great tragedy, but there's still such deep love there. And I think of couples I know that didn't find each other till late in life, or took a break like this or something, and it just fits with it. So I love it. I think the two actors really came back in great form.
I agree.
Okay, so backing up just a moment, these two scenes with Han and Leia were interrupted by BB-8 uncovering R2-D2, which we referenced here just a moment ago. And like I said, BB-8, like, he pulls off that tarp off of R2-D2 and then bumps into him and is like, beep, 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 beep. And then 3PO is like, you're wasting your time. BB-8, they do the trick that they do so frequently in Star Wars, where whether it's Chewbacca or R2-D2 or whatever, there's a conversation going on with this person that we as the audience can't understand, but whoever it is kind of responding to whatever they say by rephrasing what they just said. So 3PO says, well, you think you might have the rest of the map, or words to those effect, but I'm afraid that, he's been in low power ever since Luke left, and he might not ever be the same again. So I don't know why the impact of this scene washed over me so many times. I can't count the number of times I've seen this movie. But, when you talked about the novelization, Greg, and how it was put in there that R2-D2 might be the final key to this thing because he has the rest of the map. It's weird that he has the whole map, but that one piece, that I kind of agree. That is a kind of a really, why wouldn't they have that one last little quadrant of the galaxy? But it's a story for another day, just like how it is that Maz Kanata came up with Luke's lightsaber. But okay, we don't need to question those things right now. You want to say anything about that? Otherwise, we're going to go to Starkiller Base.
Just the idea of seeing R2 is just amazing. The way they uncovered him, literally. That's the only thing I have to say. Sorry, Greg.
Yeah, no problem. It did feel like they found him in the Lucasfilm archive at that moment and just pulled the cloth off. Yeah, and it's one of those things I remember after Force Awakens. It's like, oh, I bet Luke activated him to at that moment, and we don't really have an answer for why R2 went into hibernation and why he came back at this particular moment, to my knowledge, anyway. So it's a thread somebody could pick up, but it would have been a shame to not have R2 here. And, I think some people are saddened that R2 and 3PO don't play the central role that they played in the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy, though I think 3PO gets more as time goes on in a nice way. And R2-D2 gets a really good moment in Last Jedi as well. So, but yeah, at least he's here. I do like the idea of some poor resistance workers. Every time they move the base, they just carry the dead droid, and they're like, "God, the princess is making us move this again." I wonder why.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that. That's just like because he pulled the tarp off, and he's like, you could see the dust on top of him. And it gives you the idea of how long he's been sitting there. And it's like, wow, I know sentimental value, but we've got plenty of other astromechs that still work. So, okay.
Before you go to Starkiller Base, I just want to throw in one other thing because you alluded to the line when Leia says, "If Luke is a Jedi, you're his father." Because Han says, "Why wouldn't I be able to reach him?" And I don't know why, but this afternoon was the first time I ever thought, "Oh my God, she's right." Because who gets through to Kylo in Rise of Skywalker? It's not Luke. Luke failed to get through to Kylo in Last Jedi. It's finally talking to Han Solo, the ghost, the memory, maybe just in his own head. But Leia nailed it. It was Han Solo who solved Kylo Ren's difficulty and brought him back to the light.
Yep.
I'm also glad you brought that up because that's the movie I watched after those 4 Indiana Jones movies this past weekend. My wife was out of town. I had a lot of time on my hands, so it was a lot of movies for me. Okay, so Starkiller Base. We find Rey in the interrogation chamber, and she comes to find that Kylo is watching her, and she asks, where are the others? And then his response is, "Do you mean the murderers, traitors, and thieves you call friends? You'll be relieved to hear I have no idea." You can hear me laughing now. And when I watched this segment for this discussion, that line is just absurd. As much as I like this movie and so much of the dialogue, it's like, no, that's not what she means at all. I mean, it's Han is someone she looks up to as a father figure. As far as we can tell, there's no murderers being traitors. The First Order doesn't have any control in the galaxy at this point. And there's no thievery happening at this point other than Finn helped Poe steal a TIE fighter. But moving beyond that, and you all can comment on it in just a second after I finish summarizing the scene. But then, Rey calls Kylo Ren a creature in a mask. He takes off his helmet. So now we're getting to see Adam Driver as Kylo for the first time. And he puts it in an ash pit. Hard stop for just a second. This has been described as the ashes of Kylo Ren's enemies, which, okay, I mean, I love this movie, but that seemed like an unnecessary detail for this. The tendency of Star Wars to sometimes over-explain every detail that we see in the movie in other sources. But moving on, Kylo wants to know about the droid. He says it's got at the last piece of the map to Luke. And then he says they have the rest of the map from the archive of the Empire. And then this scene gets more difficult to watch every time I see it. Kylo starts to do the whole mind invasion thing here. And he's going about how he can see that she's lonely and afraid to leave the planet. You can see the tears starting to come down Rey's face as he's doing this. And then at night, she's so desperate to sleep. And then she imagines an ocean with an island. And then she envisions Han Solo as a father figure. And then he says, "Oh, you would have been disappointed." And he tries to pull the map out of her mind. And then Rey resists, and Kylo's, saying, "Don't be afraid. I feel it too." And then she stands up to him. "I'm not going to give you anything." And we see Kylo begin to struggle. And Rey seems to read his thoughts. You're afraid that you will never be as strong as Darth Vader. And then Kylo reacts badly. He suddenly quits and leaves the chamber here. There's a lot to be said about this, but before I get into any more of my own thoughts, I'm going to turn it over to you two, starting with Greg. What stands out to you from this scene?
So many things. I mean, first on my mind was, as is established in some of the bonus features and so on, this was Daisy Ridley's audition scene, and that she cried, just like you said so beautifully. She did that in the room for her audition, which they share the video of on some of the making of scenes. So that stood out to me. That's Daisy Ridley is really talented, and I love you, Disney, but can you please get your act together and get her in more Star Wars movies? I'm tired of both of these actors saying they want to be in more Star Wars, and we're not getting it. We're not getting it together. Which was also on my mind with the hunt for Ben Solo and that whole movement going on. So what stood out to me here is that this is a really powerful scene to establish these two characters. And while I have my quibbles with where that goes eventually, what defines them both here, he reads her mind and says, "You're lonely." She reads his and says, "You're really lonely," right? Loneliness, fear, they both have those darker sides, those darker emotions, but one has dwelt in it and the other has tried to rise above it and tried to push beyond it. And to me, that's George Lucas's light side, dark side, selfish, selfless, right? And trying to do the best despite the negative emotions, but not still acknowledge them within that. And so even here, they're nicely paralleled. And then the one other thing I'll say is just the fact that mental battle back and forth where they're pushing into each other's minds is achieved mostly with facial expressions and some really interesting kind of Force sounds. Just really excellent. When we love Star Wars so much, I think we forget to think it's a weird scene that you just have these boom, boom noises in the background and these actors straining. But I bought every second of it as always being the two of them having a psychic battle on screen.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that back and forth is it's so well done too because Greg, as you pointed out, these are two amazing actors just at the height of what they do. And so you don't need dialogue to be able to feel what's going on between them. But I just think it's ironic backtracking to what Kylo Ren said to Rey, where he says, "Do you mean the murderers, traitors, and thieves you call friends?" Like he's pulling out the morality card on her,
Yeah.
really? Come on, dude. But it is a hard scene to watch in that Rey is bound to this table. And of course, you think back to what Poe went through at the very beginning of the movie with Kylo Ren, where he was down on his knees with his hands cuffed, held behind his back. So he was restrained in a different way. So I think it's hard to see that for both of them, but there's just something different about being in that kind of prone position that makes you so much more vulnerable. And of course, I think that that was the point for Kylo Ren, is that he wanted her to be vulnerable at that point. And obviously Daisy, listen to me, Rey was able to find something that I don't even think she knew was there. And she was definitely stronger than she knows in that way. And then when she felt it, she was able to tap into it. And she didn't know what it was, but she was so good at understanding that, ooh, I can use this, that she just jumped on it right away and didn't even question it. And we've seen her do that so many other times in the movie already, in just jumping in and just taking control and taking charge. And that's what makes it so impressive in that way. But when Kylo Ren says, "Don't worry, I feel it too," I forget, and you guys can help me. When he says it, does he just mean the connection of what we know later on would be called the dyad, or what is the it in this particular situation?
Good question. I'm not sure I've got an answer to that, but Greg?
I think it is the connection. I don't know that I'd go too far, but I think he feels that there is like that again, I'll use that word parallel I used before, that they feel the same things. And don't worry, I feel it too. Of course, at the time, everybody's like, he knows she's his sister or his cousin, right? Like, there are
Mhm.
a lot of people still trying to build them into the Solo
Right.
twins from Legends. But I think it's just the idea that like I feel it too. I feel that we're the same in some regards.
So, okay, here's why it's I'm flustered. This is an incredibly well acted scene, no denying it for all the reasons that you both just said. And the way that Daisy Ridley performed here, the struggle when Kylo starts to invade her mind and the tears coming down, then her stiffening up and standing up to him and throwing it back in his face. I just have a hard time getting over this. And it's the problem is that I think it's what The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker did to this movie, in that, there's Kyle's trying to rob Rey of any bit of agency she has here. He's got her shackled and bound to this table, as Jay was just saying, invades her mind like brutally. We saw how much pain, as Jay was just saying, that put Poe in at the beginning of this movie, trying to rip knowledge out of her that she does not want to share. And you could see the pain it's causing her. Now she turns it on him and she stands it, and you can see the strength pour out of her. But then, in The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, I have a hard time forgiving. Rey just seems to get over this to a degree. She's reaching out to him. She wants to take his hand. She wants to take Ben's hands. She seems to be forgiving this, and I don't know that the forgiveness is ever earned between now and then. And so, and I'm not sure you can forgive. I mean, because I don't want to use too strong a language, but this is almost a rape when it comes down to it. And, every time we get that whole Reylo movement about these two being some sort of romantically thing, and they kiss at the end of The Rise of Skywalker, I am bothered because this is how the whole thing started. And so I don't know if I'm overacting, if I'm being overly sensitive about it, but I just feel like this was a bold choice to make this interaction. And I also understand that there's a parallel to be drawn between Leia and Darth Vader from A New Hope, that, Vader shows up with a torture droid to get information out of Leia. And yet we buy into the redemptive arc for Vader by the end of Return of the Jedi here. And so can we not extend that same grace to Kylo? But the portrayal, I think, is maybe all the difference in between the two movies. So I don't know. Either of you have any responses to that, or am I being too harsh, or what do you think?
I don't think you're being overly harsh. I think you're right to say that the level of violation going on here may be on par with Darth Vader and Princess Leia, but we see this, and we see this directly. And, I do think that it's hard to necessarily understand like what looking into somebody's mind against their will would be in this world, right? I mean, it sounds stupid, like looking through somebody's phone and their pictures or something. Like, I don't know. So I do think that you're absolutely right to say this is a really, really strong violation. The word that kept coming to my mind, and please don't anybody on the internet mistake that I'm saying, we should excuse this violation. But the fact that they both land on lonely, as I alluded to a minute ago, that, these are two people who have, at least in recent times, become incredibly isolated and have not experienced love and connection in a social way. I'm not talking about romantic love. And so the fact that when we get this push and pull, and the scene we'll jump to in a minute, where Kylo says she's untrained, but she's got this incredible raw talent. It's like it's suddenly finding out they're not alone. That seems to offer a crack in both of their dispositions. And then in Last Jedi, that will increase as they force time each other, and they start to see each other a little bit differently, and they impart to each other their most intimate kind of secrets and feelings. Kylo sharing the way Luke did, Rey, talking about her parents and so on. So I don't think you're wrong to say that this is more extreme than a lot of fans like recognize in it. And that also is 10 years difference. I mean, we've had the Me Too movement in between, so we're thinking a lot more about these issues. Should have been thinking about them in that way back then, but are thinking about them a lot more now. And yet I do think the fact that these are two young characters who are both psychologically damaged, to me, kind of makes sense why they would maybe not do the right thing with those feelings they feel in this context. And I understand that not as a lesson to take from it, but just as a reality of how people react to trauma and loneliness.
Mm-hmm. No, you guys both make so many good points. And I'm sitting here trying to process exactly how I feel about this particular scene and, the implications of it. And I guess I just land on, and maybe this is too impersonal on my part, but I just land on the fact that, as you brought up the comparison between Darth Vader and Princess Leia, the door closes and we don't get to see what actually transpires, which is a good thing. I mean, no one wants to see that, right? And we find out later on that Leia was also very strong in everything that she went through, and that she was able to resist what Vader was putting her through. And you think about that, and of course he didn't know it at the time, but he's torturing his own daughter, and Leia still had room for, even though Luke was always looking for the redemption. Leia was always looking for the justification, I guess you could say, for her father. I don't know if it was ever about necessarily redemption for her as it is for her own son. And maybe that's part of what she was telling Han earlier, too, to sort of jump back to that, in that, he's our son. There's light in him. I know it. She's not giving up on him at this point. And I think that that's where Luke was with his father. But as far as this scene is concerned, I often wonder, would it be as bothersome if Rey were a man, if Rey were Poe, or if Poe was being put under this particular circumstance? Is it a violation? Absolutely. Did we need to see the entire thing in order to understand what was going on between the two of them to establish Rey's power? Yes. So as uncomfortable as it is, and I understand everything, that is all wrong about this, I don't necessarily want to say it was necessary, but could it have been done a little bit differently instead of being the visualization in the way that Rey was being restrained that she was? Yes, I do. So, so I think that there is that. I think the interrogation needed to happen only because of the fact that it does establish how strong Rey is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it does. It does. Again, it's the look. I don't want to diminish torture. So,
Sure.
just as Greg was giving a disclaimer here a second ago, I'm giving my own one here. Yeah. There's obviously we don't condone physical violence against a person or trying to get information, but again, this is a woman strapped to a chair, and your point is well taken, Jay. If this is a man, how would we think of it different? Okay, okay. I'm going to move on because let's move on. And here's why. Getting to the next scene, we've now got Kylo reporting to Snoke, and Snoke starts this whole scene like, she resisted you, the scavenger, and then that's when Kylo comes back with, she's strong with the Force but untrained, and then Snoke asks about the droid, and this is when Hux arrives and says, well, Kylo didn't think it was necessary, and it's with the Resistance now, so he really blew it. And we got this whole rivalry going on between Kylo and Hux at the time. And then so Snoke agrees that the Resistance needs to be destroyed. Hux knows location because a scout ship was just there. And so, go take out this planet in the Millennium system. And then Snoke tells Kylo to bring Rey to him. Okay. Furthering the comparison between Kylo and Rey on the one hand and Vader and Leia on the other, Kylo is rocked to the core by what just happened here. And meanwhile, what's the next scene we see Vader with in A New Hope after he's tortured Leia with that droid? It's like, her resistance to the mind probe is considerable. He's not at all flummoxed by any abilities that Leia showed, just like kind of impressed. I just tried to get information out of her and I couldn't do it. But there's no bringing her to the Emperor. There's nothing like that here. Meanwhile, to your point, Greg, is that Kylo's like, we got to do something with this. I just ran into this person, this most unexpected person, and she just, how many times has Kylo done this? Ripped information out of someone's mind, and here a woman just stood, who's bound to a table, just stood up to him and threw it right back in his face. So if there was a redeeming, it was a well-acted scene. Don't let me convince you as otherwise, but if there's a redeeming quality to the problem I have an issue with, I think it is that Rey was able to get under his skin in the way that you suggested.
Well, and I'll keep this a little light, but we're recording on the week where a new Kylo Ren comic came out, and it's him at the other end of his journey, and it's two lower first order officers kind of competing underneath him in much the way Hux and Kylo are competing in this movie for Snoke's, I don't know, affection for a
Mhm.
promotion. And it is funny that this is the clearest moment when Hux gets the upper hand. And I think that's related to what you just said. He's on his back foot. He doesn't know what to make of Rey. He, was kind of mocking all her. There's a funny class thing going on where Kylo has had all these privileges. He's one of the elites of the galaxy from the royal family, for lack of a better term, and she's nothing. Like, she's below working class. She's a scavenger. She's a beggar, and the fact that she is more powerful than him, or bested him, at least in this content, has really kind of shook him at this moment when he's telling her, like, well, Han Solo would have disappointed you. Like, you couldn't handle this life I would have had. It's no good. And she's kind of proving to him that she didn't need any of it to become more powerful. So I do really like that this is kind of, he's in a wobble. Hux gets the better of him. He looks, in these scenes where Snoke is giant, which it kind of had slipped my mind how they played that game in Force Awakens, and you're like, how big is this guy? And then they make it clear it's a hologram later. And so on. So it like all works to make Kylo Ren across all those dynamics feel small. And that works so well. I'm going to go back to the cheesy line you pointed out, that like the murderers, thieves, and that makes him sound like an internet troll. And that's what an internet troll is somebody who's so big and tough, and then they get a little dent in that armor and they lash out and they get unwobbled, and they're having difficulty. So I don't think the internet needs to hear me talk about Kylo Ren and how great a character he is, but he's really an original type of villain. This, I really want to be the biggest, toughest bad guy. And I think he prefigures a lot of what we've seen emerge in society in the 10 years since. This type of identity that's hyper masculine and really forceful, and yet actually quite vulnerable and, unable to take criticism and so on. So, it comes across, but in the combination of the two scenes really nicely.
Yeah, he comes across as very fragile in this moment. You can tell he's very confuzzled, and everything that just happened, he's like you said, he's like on his hind leg going, what is happening? And why is this happening? And then he's trying to pick up the pieces, and then there's Hux. Oh yeah, their location. They tracked a scout ship. Yeah. And now he's one-upping him too. So like you said, he's kind of had this almost privileged in some ways sort of upbringing, especially compared to Rey. And he's like the spoiled kid that's never been told no. And all of a sudden now he's having to, again, pick up those pieces is what it feels like in this moment.
Yeah. I gotta tell you, this most recent viewing of this segment, I really liked the end of it when Snoke tells Kylo to bring the girl to him, just because, not even thinking of it in the context of the Rise of Skywalker, but again, this idea of, and they're not Sith, Snoke is not portrayed as a Sith, Kylo is not portrayed as a Sith, they're dark side users, but there's always like rule of two thing that we know going on in the background here. And just, there's this kind of understated, sinister thing going on with Snoke. It's like, oh, really? You found a really powerful Force user that came out of nowhere. And even thinking of things like, Anakin Skywalker, for that matter, he came out of nowhere from the deserts of Tatooine and became one of the most powerful Jedi ever until he fell to the dark side. Well, now we've got this, girl that doesn't even have a last name from the backwater of the galaxy that's distributed all this Force power and resisted you, Master of the Knights of Ren. Bring her to me. I want to see what's going on with it. I kind of like that parallel. I am not as big an endorser of the whole ring theory thing as a lot of people are when it comes to Star Wars. I think it works when you're talking about the original 6 movies, but kind of falls apart when we try to bring everything else into it. But the parallel, at least, that's drawn in here is didn't escape me this time. Okay.
I like that.
So we now get Rey using a Jedi mind trick on James Bond that you referenced earlier, Greg. And I love how for years Daniel Craig denied that this was him in this scene. Only for when he shot his final James Bond movie and was doing the interview circuit, he finally started admitting it, that yeah, he was there. He just had an opportunity to go on set. He put on the armor and he filmed this scene. And so, yeah, I don't want to steal all your thunder if you want to talk about the scene, but you know, she gets this idea to try the Jedi mind trick. This is her first attempt at exerting a force power after the confrontation with Kylo. And she says, you remove the restraints and leave the cell with the door open. And she doesn't sound real confident. And then the stormtrooper, Daniel Craig, comes up and says, you know, I'll tighten these restraints. And he's giving it to her. And so finally, she put some confidence into it. And you could see I love the sound effect they did when Daniel Craig stands straight up, that it lands with him. And he's like, I will remove these restraints and leave the cell door open. And then she's like, oh, and you'll drop your weapon? And I'll drop my weapon. And so he walks out the door. The delivery of that was perfect. And then Kylo returns, of course, he's gone and throws a temper tantrum here. I love this part every time I see it, just a bit more. But what did you think about it, Greg?
I mean, I absolutely loved it too. And you know, I already alluded, I was, maybe this is the most youthful thing about me. I didn't get into James Bond until Daniel Craig was James Bond. So he has always been my James Bond. And I do really enjoy that. You know, now that he admitted it, it's like, it's so obvious. You can hear the voice and you can see the posture. But particularly in the 10-year sense, I've fallen in love with Daniel Craig all over again as Benoit Blanc in the Knives Out franchise.
Yeah.
And when they did the press junket for the most recent Wake Up Dead Man movie, Ryan Johnson talked about how he was writing the script and he would get sent the dailies from set. And he said he was sitting in a room with Pablo Hidalgo and they were just watching, and they watched this scene in a rough form. And he said to Pablo, like, who is that? And Pablo's like, it's just an extra. Like, what are you talking about? He's like, no. Look at the way he walks. Like, that's a really good trained actor. And Pablo's like, you're crazy. What are you talking about? And then like 2 days later, Pablo was like, I asked it. You were right. It was Daniel Craig and hidden in the armor. So it's great to have that connectivity too. But I just remember the biggest laugh when she gives and you'll drop your weapon and I'll drop my weapon. And the crowd went wild and loved it. And again, it's this slow accumulation of Rey's powers till you really get the lightsaber hitting her hand. But and I'll only also add that you were right. The way Daisy changes her delivery for the one that finally works, it just feels to me like something's flowing through her. It's confidence, but it's like it's the force, and it's like it's on, right? We're there and we're going there. So I love this scene too. This is the moment I was like, oh, Jay and Dennis did me right. They gave me some really good minutes because you don't quite remember what will come in, and I was like, I get to talk about this scene. That's so great.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I love, they talk about later in The Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker about peace and purpose. And I think that that's what comes over her in that point. When she says that, there's this calm and there's a peacefulness to her, but yet she uses that purpose of using this mind trick. I guess I thought to myself, gosh, she must have learned what this mind trick thing, from the legends that she'd heard about the Jedi, and like Luke Skywalker, I thought he was a myth, kind of thing. So, because otherwise, how would she even know to try it in the first place? And so there's this sweet naivete that almost comes along with the first attempt. It's almost like, yeah, you will undo these handcuffs, question mark kind of thing. And then she realizes, okay, I felt something just a second ago. I need to tap into whatever that was, because obviously that was something and I can use that. So, but yes, it was super cute when she said, "And you'll drop your weapon," because you're right. Everybody, I remember that too. Everybody in the theater was just like, "Oh my gosh," laughing. So
Right.
yeah.
So now we get into the name of the term for this escapes me, but it is basically explained to us what's going to happen in the third act of the movie, where the resistance is gathered around. Well, before that, we see Starkiller Base starting to charge, and the sun is being drained into the weapon. And we can talk about it in a minute because they talk about this over the course of this last bit here. But Poe confirms that the scan data from Snap's reconnaissance flight shows that the First Order base has a hyper lightspeed weapon within the planet itself. And the whole mission for Snap to go figure this out was covered in, I think, the Poe Dameron comic. I don't know if either of you two read that. I remember the time that was kind of hairy, his little mission there to get. But anyways, go check that out if you haven't read it. And then we get the if the audience was already not impressed with how powerful Starkiller Base is, we get the comparison between the Death Star and Starkiller Base right next to it. And I love how unimpressed Han is with this. So what? It's big. There's always a way to destroy these things. And, and then Finn's explaining how the planet works. It takes the power of the sun. When the sun is drained, that's when the weapon's ready to go. And they explain that, this is, Leia says, well, we've confirmed that we're the next target for this. And again, this is where Han says, okay, how do we blow up? There's always a way to do that. And then Stetura comes up with this idea of a thermal oscillator. I'm no engineer, but I really tried to look up today to see if this was a thing. And no definition of oscillator that I could find made it work. But regardless, it's Star Wars. It's a space opera. We'll let it go. And then Finn says, yeah, there's one in Precinct 47. He says they got to disable the shields. Finn knows how to do it, but he has to be there. Han says, how are we going to get there? Leia's like, or Han says, we'll get you there. Leia's like, Han, how? And he's like, if I told you, you wouldn't like it. And that, for me, was the best, recovering bit of dialogue between those two characters, where it's like, okay, we're seeing each other for the first time after being estranged for all these years. But then you can see that, at least for this moment, they've gotten back into this element that they're used to. It's like, we're going up against the impossible. How do we do it? And Han's like, oh, I've got an idea, but you aren't going to like it. And she's like, okay, yeah, you're right. Whatever it is.
Never tell me the odds.
Yeah. And so anyway, so they got this plan. They're going to get Finn past the shields. They'll bring them down and the resistance will attack. I'm going to put aside for the fact that if Han could just get past the shields at light speed, I don't know why the X-Wings couldn't, but that's neither here nor there. So there you go. We got the setup for the rest of the movie. Greg, what do you think?
I mean, I think it's classic Star Wars. We get, we get one of these in Jedi and Phantom Menace and A New Hope, obviously. And so it's kind of one of those necessary elements. It's a little clunky, but they have fun with it. I think you're right. Harrison is the funniest here. My other viewing project this week has been catching up on Shrinking, his Apple TV show. And he's really good at comedy, actually, on that show. And it's kind of a reminder when you see him kind of cracking these jokes. To me, jokey Han Solo is much more a part of Return of the Jedi, and this is sounds like him on Endor, kind of there. Other than that, shout out to Admiral Akbar back. This is where we see him, Nia Num, in the briefing. And then I also was just struck by all of the J.J. Abrams buddies who are around. Greg Grunberg as Snap Wexley, of course. And Ken Lung, who was on Lost and popped up this year in Project Hail Mary in a small role, but as Satura, who notes the thermal oscillator, and he notes it's in Sector 47. And so longtime J.J. Abrams fans knew by this movie that's JJ's favorite number. And if you watch Lost and if you watch Alias and all the way through, you can always find 47. 47 and Kelvin. Kelvin came up in the first part of the movie, which I believe is his grandfather's name, but those are usually worked into J.J. Abrams things. So
and the USS Kelvin from the Star Trek remake that he
Mm-hmm.
did.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love the fact that, they sneak in these numbers like 1138 and, like Docking Bay 94 and whatever, because that's just one of those deep dive kind of things that you get to have fun with. But yeah, I'm with you. I love Han in this entire scene, and I think you're right, Dennis, too, that there's that classic banter that gets us back to this is what they do best together. So at one point, you did this because that's what you knew best. I did this because that's what I knew best. But together, this is what we know best. And even though there's that kind of back and forth play and, oh, you're not going to like it, and it's still them, and it's still the way that their love language, I guess you could say, blowing things up, blowing up big planet killers is their love language, so to speak.
Yeah. Now, my only regret is that with all this is that Disney didn't take over Star Wars earlier and give us movies when they all would have been younger. And if they were going to replace Legends, give us some of the adventures where they could have been more of that swashbuckling type of role for longer, as opposed to actors that were in their late 60s and 70s at the time. And but as you said, Greg, Harrison Ford can sell anything. I mean, Captain America: Brave New World was not the best movie, but I loved Harrison Ford in it as as the president in Red Hulk. So I'll see him in anything. Okay. Well, that brings us to the end of the segment. Then this always happens. As I was saying earlier, I feel like I pick out a segment like, oh, there's not going to be a whole lot to talk about. We'll be done in 45 minutes, and here we are at an hour and 20 minutes later, and we are just now starting to wrap up the conversation. So, Greg, thank you so much for joining us for this.
Oh, it was sincerely a pleasure. And, I watched this a lot last year for the anniversary, but I hadn't had a Force Awakens session yet this year. So it was nice to dip in. And I think I'm going to go throw on at least from here till the end to close out the night. But, I think it is crazy that it's been a decade and now 11 years almost since this came out. But, for all the good and the bad that has come in the Disney Star Wars era, I wouldn't trade it for the world. You just said, yeah, if only they'd gotten it a little earlier. Sounds to me like an animated series. Boy, you could do a good animated series of the swashbuckling, and they have good young voice actors for all those characters at this point. It'd be real easy to do. Give us Clone Wars, but after Return of the Jedi, I think you could have a lot of fun. But sorry, I know. I was going to say Bob Iger, but he retired. I know that all the Disney brass listen to your show, so I'll just slip that
in. Bob's too busy running the Lakers now, so just found out.
Dennis has them all on speed dial.
That's right. Well, Lucasfilm, that's Greg at Eyeoncannon.com. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and this discussion of The Force Awakens. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we'd greatly appreciate it if you've subscribed to the podcast if you haven't done so already. We're pretty much available on all the podcatchers that are out there. And then after you've done that, we appreciate your ratings, reviews, comments, whatever it is that your podcatcher provides out there, especially if it's Apple Podcast. And then, of course, you can find all episodes of the show over on retrozap.com, which is home of the RetroZap Podcast Network and all the other great shows that are there. Jay, you want to remind everybody where we can be found online and social media?
Yeah, so one more time, we are most conveniently found at Podcast Stardust on all of your socials. So that would include Facebook and Instagram, as well as Pinterest. We've got tons of boards over there for everything Star Wars. And then you can also hit us up on our 2 YouTube outlets where you can find all of our episodes. So there's no video, only audio, but you can listen to all of the episodes to your heart's content. And please leave us a review over there, subscribe to the show, share those out with your friends. And that does leave room for some comments as well. And Dennis is always great about looking for those comments there and on Spotify. And we're also on Audible. So basically everywhere you can find podcasts, we should be there. And then if you'd like to drop us a line, you could do so at podcaststardust@gmail.com. And one more thing we would like to ask is if you'd love to support the show with some merch, you can head over to our TeePublic store. The link to that is in our show notes. And we do have 7 different show logo designs available. So you can purchase and add to cart to your little heart's content over there. So once again, the link to that is in our show notes.
And Greg, where can everyone find what you are doing?
I'm all over the place, as you noted, but my regular home is over on the Long Take Review podcast. So we've had a little bit of a dry August, but we are coming back with Spider-Man Brand New Day episode very soon. We also just covered The Invite, a great smaller movie out there, and then there's lots of Odyssey coverage. And this summer, for the first half of summer, I did a great job of keeping up with my blog. And now I've fallen off again as I've become full-time dad. But over at Eyeoncannon.com, that's EYEONCANON, you can find some of my musings and writings about the Spielberg movie that came out, about Mandalorian and Grogu, and about the Odyssey. And I hope to get another entry or two up before the end of summer. So thanks again for having me. I love being here. So I can't wait to hear the rest of the movie discussions this year too.
Oh, thanks, Greg. We always love having you on, so we really appreciate you.
Awesome. Awesome. Glad you could join us. Okay. Upcoming on the show, we'll be ending the week on Friday with a look at recent Star Wars news. We should probably have some stuff from D23 to discuss. And then on Monday, we'll be getting into episode 3 from The Ninth Jedi. So with that, thanks for listening to episode 1073 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. And until next time, may the Force be with you.